So welcome to our Perinatal Collaborative meeting. My name is Jax Hermer. I'm the chair of the Perinatal Collaborative. Next slide, please. We have an exciting day. We have extended this meeting from our normal 1.5 hours to 2 hours because we have 3 really incredible presentations for everyone today. The first of which we have folks from Rebuilding Hope, who will be presenting about the risks and impacts of gender-based violence on perinatal health and care. LaRhonda Osborn from the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department will be presenting about the impact, the historical impact of sudden infant death syndrome and sudden unexplained infant deaths on African-American infants. And we will be finished by a presentation from Karina Kull, a graduate nursing student at University of Washington, who has just conducted a survey among likely many of you and our colleagues to understand what are experiences and challenges to linking families to social services in Pierce County. And she'll be presenting who she surveyed, her findings, and her recommendations today. So, next slide. Just as a reminder to please keep yourself muted if you're not talking. You can raise your hand and speakers will address them based on their preference, likely after their presentation, but they might prefer to present or ask, take presentations during. That's up to them. As I said earlier, we are recording this presentation and it will be posted to our website, tpchd.org/PCPC. And that is also where we advertise all the things that are happening for this organization. We are always working to expand those coming to our board meetings and looking for more agency representation. We have space for our board if you are interested and you would like to represent your agency and represent the incredible diversity of providers supporting parents in the perinatal period and want to be involved. So, feel free to reach out to me, put your information in the chat. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement.
Arti duf arti swatwiftud atis poyalapaj, a slatsasil, alti disha tu alturi tuha.
It is the land right here that the Puyallup people have lived on since the beginning.
This right
here is where we are in the world, our homelands.
We work on our ancestral lands. We raise our children who go to school on the land of the Puyallup people.
We acknowledge that the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed for the whites to take our land for their benefit.
Land was assigned to our people. The Caucasians said, "This is your land," and they took that land from us too.
Our land was stolen from us. Treaties were broken.
But we are still here today.
Our people forage for food and materials, we pick berries, we canoe, we practice our traditional ways, and we speak Twelshutsi.
Just as our ancestors did.
Hoya chas.
We are finished.
Okay, without further ado, our first presentation. Thank you all so much for being here.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you all for having us. So there are actually three of us here today, I believe, who will be talking and sharing information about the risks and impacts of gender-based violence on perinatal health and care. Thank you for having us. I'll let everybody do their own presentation. We're going to kind of be going back and forth a bit. But we have folks, I'm from Rebuilding Hope. We have, I believe, Nadia from Crystal Judson Family Justice Center, and then Kelli from our sister's house. But I will let each of them in the next slides. And thank you, Kendra, for moving our slides forward for us. We're sharing the presentation, so Kendra's agreed to do that. So if you don't mind moving on to the next one. I will just share that the three of us are here together representing our agencies through the Pierce County Commercial Sexual Exploitation Collaborative. In addition to partnering to respond to the intersections of family violence, that's intimate partner violence or domestic violence and sexual violence, Rebuilding Hope, our sister's house, and the Family Justice Center formed the Pierce County Commercial Sexual Exploitation Collaborative in efforts to support each other and train providers to partner on referrals and inform and influence local stakeholders on how to better prevent and respond to gender-based violence in our community with a focus on commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. Next slide, please. And so, Kelli, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Yeah,
Kelli. So,
sure.
Kelli, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, and then I'm not sure on the slide. I think then, Kendra, can you move to the next slide real quick? Okay, and then, yeah, so we'll just, Kendra, if you can move back. Kelli will start by introducing herself and then share some about her agency. Thanks, Kelli.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to be here. My name is Kelli Robinson. I'm the executive director of our sister's house. And our vision is to strengthen families, empower survivors to become self-sufficient and help children affected by domestic violence heal with the hope of breaking the cycle of domestic violence in women, and particularly African-American women. Our mission is to lead, empower, and inspire change by limiting domestic violence through intervention and prevention services while incorporating culturally specific care in the process. Next slide, please. Sure, and some of our programs and services include intimate partner family violence, legal advocacy. We also have a teen dating violence intervention and prevention program that we do in Tacoma Public Middle Schools. We offer supportive and healing support groups, and we also work with court-involved youth with a partnership with Pierce County Juvenile Court on positive youth development programs, and also focus on mental health and well-being for Black and African American youth. Thank you. Next.
So my name's Nadia Van Atter, and I'm the assistant director over at the Crystal Judson Family Justice Center. And to start with, I just want to say that the Family Justice Center is a national model, and the idea with that model is to have co-location of services where you have community-based services in addition to law enforcement and prosecutors. But we have very clear distinctions between confidentiality between those two sides. So it's a national model where that co-location and collaboration is really key. So our mission is to partner with survivors to heal pasts and build futures. And we do this through providing 8 different programming on site with the idea that power and control wheel in mind to try to disrupt those different spokes. So when someone comes on site, they can access community advocacy, they can get support in filing domestic violence protection orders, they can access DSHS and DCS. We do outreach in the community, but we also cold call out on domestic violence police reports and have support groups, help folks connect into next steps. And if they choose to engage in criminal justice services, we can help facilitate that connection. Rebuilding Hope and our sister's house are 2 of our longest standing community partners. And we, as a matter of fact, have 3 OSH advocates stationed on site. Next slide. Stephanie, you are muted.
I'm not going to share much at all like that, am I? So, anyway, my name is Stephanie Sachs. I'm the clinical director with Rebuilding Hope. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and oversee our therapy program and provide some trainings and things like that. Rebuilding Hope is Pierce County's only certified community sexual assault program. We serve Pierce and Kitsap counties. We've been around for just over 50 years through a number of different names, but what we offer is really support to individuals and families who have experienced sexual violence across the continuum. So that may be incest or childhood sexual abuse, that may be rape, that may be commercial sexual exploitation or sex trafficking, that could be sexual harassment. So really along the continuum, regardless of when in that survivor's life the incident or incidents happened. So sometimes folks that we are assisting are going through a criminal justice process. Sometimes they're not. More often than not, in fact, the assault or the abuse may have happened a month ago. It may have happened 45 years ago, but the impact of it is continuing throughout their lifetime. So we have our mission is to provide support, promote healing, and to partner to end sexual violence. You can see our vision there as well. We have a 24-hour crisis information and support line, which is probably the best way to access our services. And that is answered 24/7, 365 days a week by trained advocates who are there to provide support. In addition, our advocacy program provides legal advocacy, assistance with protection orders, accompany victims to court, emotional advocacy, medical advocacy. All of our advocates report out to Pierce and Kitsap's hospitals to assist victims during the forensic rape exam if they choose to have that done. We have an education program that goes into the schools and different community groups to provide and share information from a prevention focus. And then our sex trafficking and exploitation prevention program that includes and offers wraparound case management for those who are at a high risk to experience trafficking or have currently or in the past experienced sexual exploitation. And then our therapy program, we have a therapy program that is specific to treating the impact of sexual assault and abuse. So it can be hard to find those resources with that specialization, and we offer a very low to no sliding fee scale for those in need. So I have the QR code there and our information. If you need any support or you have any clients, feel free to refer them or reach out to us. And you can also see some other info and services we offer. Thanks. So we're going to provide the introductions, which we've just done, talk a bit, share information about the impacts and risks of gender-based violence, give some recommendations and resources for you all that hopefully will be helpful in your work, and then have some time at the end for questions and answers if you have any questions or any information you'd like to share. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll start with Kelli with our Sisters House.
Thank you, Stephanie. So our Sisters House has been providing culturally specific domestic violence and intimate partner violence services in our community for going on 30 years this year. And some of the things that we found that are important to share about why the reasons for culturally specific services, particularly for Black women, is because Black women, approximately 45% of Black women in the U.S. have experienced some form of intimate partner violence, including physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and Black women are 35% more likely to experience intimate partner violence than white women. Black women don't often seek help. We are less likely to report domestic violence to fear of police brutality, mistrust of the legal system, and just a cultural stigma of sharing our business. Only 1 in 3 Black women who experience intimate partner violence seek professional help. So we have a lot of outreach and education that we have to do just to get our women to come in and to seek service and realize that they are actually experiencing a domestic violence situation. Homicide and femicide, Black women are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by an intimate partner than a white woman. Homicide is the leading cause of death for Black women aged 18 to 44, with intimate partner violence being a significant contributor. And one of the things we started this year was providing all our clients with danger assessments. It's an evidence-based tool that is used to measure risk of homicide related to intimate partner violence, because we need to have a measure so we can actually show our clients you are at risk. There's the evidence here to prove it. And so with that, we try to, once that score is determined that they're high risk of strangulation, we work we've put a team together to address and help get victims to safety immediately. And that team includes law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, including the Family Justice Center and other community partners, just so we can have a coordinated community response to preventing IPV-related homicide. Thank you. Next slide. The intersection of perinatal health and domestic violence in Black women, pregnancy and abuse. Black women are 1.5 times more likely to experience physical violence to an intimate partner than white women. Abuse during pregnancy is linked to higher rates of preterm birth, low birth weight, and maternal mortality. Lack of support systems. Black women facing domestic violence during pregnancy often encounter barriers to accessing shelters, healthcare, and legal support. And then with that fear of law enforcement, it just combines to make really a hectic situation for Black women during this time. Very stressful. Thank you. Next slide.
So, and like Kelli said, while domestic violence happens in all communities, we know that different communities experience it at higher rates. And so it's really important that we're talking about it in general, but specifically when folks are experiencing pregnancy, because we know that children and reproductive justice are often used as control tactics. We know that lethality drastically increases during this point in time. So some of the ways that we will see kiddos and reproductive justice being used against clients or survivors, we're going to see things like threats of contacting CPS, tampering with someone's birth control, either forcing someone to carry a pregnancy through, or doing things that are going to cause a miscarriage or forcing them to have abortions, threats to take kiddos away or contact law enforcement if they leave with kids. But there's also the reality of just the fear of navigating family law courts when you've got kids in common with someone. And one of the things, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but lethality increases during pregnancy, and leaving also drastically increases lethality. And so I think both of those are really important things to keep in mind in your practice and as we talk through these different pieces. Now, the stats on here are just FJC clients. In 2024, we had 22% of clients disclose that they had experienced abuse during pregnancy. I think in reality, this number is actually higher. People don't want to disclose when there's violence happening during pregnancy for fear that that's a CPS thing, that's something that can be reported. The other reality is unless violence is really extreme, we don't always equate it with domestic violence, right? So unless we have very, very clear marks, we don't think of some of the other things as being part of that. So in reality, I think that number is higher. And then in 2024, 47% of our clients identified that they experienced sexual violence or coercion in their relationship. I think that number is more accurate than the 22% one is, but again, I still think that that's lower because again, people don't necessarily equate sexual violence or sexual coercion as happening in their relationship. They tend to see it as we're married, they're my partner, I have to say yes, or I eventually gave in and not realizing kind of the coercion piece. So I think these numbers are higher. In the DV realm, we have done a much better job of cross-screening these two things in probably the past 15 years or so, and really connecting that overlap of sexual violence in DV relationships. I also do want to note we were amidst a data transition last year, so our numbers have been very interesting to look back on to see how we've captured them. So that could potentially impact those numbers on this screen as well. Next slide.
So I'm just going to share a little bit of general information about the prevalence of sexual violence in general. One statistic, 1 in 5 women in the US have experienced a rape or attempted rape in their lives. Approximately 43% of women report experiencing some form of contact sexual violence in their lifetime. So the reason that I shared those statistics, even though they're very broad, is just recognizing the large numbers of individuals who come into our practices who will have experienced interpersonal violence, sexual violence. And I think a lot of times we don't recognize that to that degree. I'm going to share, and when we think about sexual violence, I think also I'll share some specifics to it, but I think it's important to look at that broadly across a lifetime, as I mentioned. So when we often think about a partner or someone close to the person now who may be responsible for their pregnancy in adulthood as the person who may have raped or assaulted them, and often we don't think about the impact, I think, of childhood sexual abuse on perinatal experiences. So as a therapist, that's kind of where I would like to focus a little bit, just to add some info. There's a couple quotes that I have here. I'm going to try and kind of move that so I can read them to you from a study that I'll share with you on the next slide. Survivors of rape, this is talking about their birth experience. It's a little explicit, so forgive me for that, but I think it helps explain that experience for this person. When they put in that vacuum cup, it was the first time I really had thought about this in years. I was back in it, being held down, not being able to move. In any case, I was completely naked. I felt a kind of shame too. Up to this point, I was kind of angry in a way, but then it was a little bit like when the rapist, raped me. It was kind of too late, nothing left to fight for. Afterwards, I felt I'd done such a terribly bad job. So thinking about those sexual assault experiences on the prenatal care that we're providing, on that birth experience, on the parenting after the fact, and some of the parallels that can come up when people get triggered for those experiences. Just laying there on your back, you're in the same position when you again go into the same state as when you were raped, plain and simple. You're laying there and things happen down there. Points between the legs, the feelings of being held down. It was really strange. My body held back and would not do it. I wanted to give birth, but my body would not do it. Next slide, please. Right, so we know from a sexual assault perspective, when we're working with adult survivors of childhood sexual assault or childhood adults who experienced assault in childhood or more recent rape survivors or people who've experienced commercial sexual exploitation, there's an increased risk and presence of mental health concerns, PTSD being the most common. This is true for anyone who's experienced interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, anxiety, depression, suicidality, substance abuse, and addiction that can be factors that are going to influence a pregnancy as well, as you all know. Chronic pain and untreated gynecological issues can oftentimes come up and be present when survivors are coming in for care. There's also an increased risk of preterm low birth rate, gestational hypertension. And in a few studies that I saw, they talked about longer second stages of labor and a higher increase of having to have interventions that occur during labor, such as C-sections as well. So just some reasons why it is so important to be aware of that. Challenges with prenatal care, just that mistrust of medical providers given past experiences and current experiences. Feeling traumatized by that medical process and the questions that are asked and the intimacy that's often involved in a labor situation, re-traumatization as well, as was kind of talked about in those prior slides. Pregnancy fears, loss of control that can mirror the sexual assault. Oftentimes we see that survivors of sexual violence will put off going in to seek medical care of all sorts, dental care, medical care, because of the ways that it parallels what can happen during abuse, from gynecological exams to dental exams, having to disrobe, a number of factors involved there that I think sometimes don't often think about. Parenting fears, of course, bonding regarding with the child, especially if they remind them of the offender, if the offender is the other parent, the relationship with that person, how it will impact the parenting over the years, and the social disconnection due to the partner, if the partner is the offender. But also, I think we often don't think about that increased isolation and family support that can be withdrawn as a result of sexual assault. And it's increased during pregnancy. If someone is a survivor of childhood sexual assault and abuse, 95 to 90% of the time with children, the perpetrator knows that victim. So it's not uncommon that the perpetrator may still be a member of the family. When someone becomes pregnant, because of those increased risks and fears by exposure to other people in the family, they may withdraw even more from families that have maybe been supportive in some ways due to fears for their kids. So those are just some of the things that we see. Next slide. Let's see. I'm not sure whose this is.
This is mine.
Okay, great, Kelli, thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. So with all that being said, we know that the impacts of domestic violence and IPV has great detrimental effects during pregnancy, and this impacts all women. And some of those impacts are IPV survivors will experience increased risk of health factors, including asthma, chronic pain, digestive issues, heart problems, stress, problems with immune systems, PTSD, depression, anxiety, etc. These are all the impacts, all the things that can impact or be amplified during pregnancy. Survivors experiencing abuse during pregnancy are more likely to delay entry into prenatal care. Violence during pregnancy is linked to an increased risk of IPV homicide, increased risk of mental health concerns, which we stated, which include depression, anxiety, stress, and postpartum depression, increased risk of preterm delivery, low birth weight, higher rates of miscarriage and forced abortion, increases in behavioral risk factors, including smoking and substance use disorders, could be linked to coping mechanisms, and increased isolation for family, friends, support, and network in the community. So what basically, what we see during this time is the victim will isolate themselves, keep themselves closed away. So a lot of times we often don't even realize what is happening to them because of that isolation. Next slide.
And then next slide. And I apologize, I did not get the wording on this one updated until too late. So this slide is actually supposed to read our sister's house and FJC recommendations when working with survivors of IPV. Know your resources. You do not have to be the expert. There are experts out in the community. You've got 3 agencies on this platform that this is our wheelhouse and what we do. But having an idea of what the resources are and having them handy is really important. So when disclosure does happen. Screen every time. Someone is probably going to say no the first time you ask them if they're safe at home and they're experiencing domestic violence. They're going to say no the first time. They may say no the second and the third and the fourth time, but maybe the 5th time they're going to disclose. So it's really important that screening is routine and it happens regularly. And make sure to screen when it's just the one person by themselves. If you're asking that question and the partner's in the room, they're going to say no. And then that could potentially impact that rapport building later on down the line. Now, depending on your role, because I realize there's a lot of folks on this call, but you can go deeper than just saying, are you experiencing violence at home or are you safe at home? And potentially ask about what behaviors are that's going to provide more of an insight. People don't necessarily identify that they're experiencing domestic violence unless it's something really extreme, right? If I have a really clear mark, then maybe I know, but maybe I'm not understanding that it's really about power and control throughout the relationship. So asking questions about behaviors such as, this is a really stressful time during a pregnancy. How are you coping with stress? How do you handle it? How does your partner cope with stress? Are you able to do you have a network of people that you can connect into? Are there family members or friends that you can talk with about this and what's going on? Those types of questions are going to provide a very different set of insight than just asking, if there's domestic violence. Both are important, but it's going to give you a very different scope. The next one up there is expect disclosures. If you start screening, don't be surprised when someone does disclose. And when they disclose, it's really important to be aware of how you respond. And I realize that everyone on this call, this is like your job is to help guide people through very stressful times. But again, just kind of keeping that in mind. If someone discloses and their partner has always seemed really charming and overly involved, just be aware of, oh, wow, I never would have guessed that from them, right? That type of response is not going to be supportive. So when someone discloses, validate what they're saying. I'm glad you felt safe to tell me this. You deserve to be safe. Can I help connect you to resources? Or what would be helpful for you in this situation? And being aware of what your body language looks like when you respond. And again, I realize we are talking to a bunch of professionals that you probably already think about these things, but I don't think it ever hurts just to throw it out there, just to triple check. And then when disclosures do happen, allow the survivors to direct the conversation. Not everyone is going to be ready to leave when they make that disclosure. As I mentioned before, leaving is one of the most dangerous times. And so this could just be their first step of starting that documentation and starting that conversation. But it doesn't mean that they're going to walk out of the office and, go file a protection order or pack up and move out right away. Listen, observe, and document. I can't tell you how many stories I have heard from clients where their medical providers or folks throughout their pregnancy have played such a vital role in documentation of where clients have identified this is where I first disclosed that there was violence happening. And at some point in time when they decided to file family law, file for a protection order, they were able to go back to those providers to get documentation that showed that they had started engaging in services and that this had been a pattern and had been going on. And so really just being aware of, talking with your team to see, what are your guys' policies and procedures around documentation? What does that look like? Because that could be really helpful for the survivor on. And again, just remember that leaving is dangerous and it's a process. And so when someone discloses and when someone starts connecting into care, that's the beginning of their journey, and letting them make the decisions of when they are ready to leave and what steps they're ready to take. Again, you've got experts on this call. Our agencies are all available to field questions and help support survivors. Next slide.
So just a few recommendations as well, I think largely from a sexual violence perspective. As Nadia had mentioned, screening early for a history of sexual abuse, assault, sex trafficking. And for me, what I think is really important in doing that is to explain why we're asking those questions. I think so often people think it doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with this appointment. I'm not going to check the box. I'm not going to disclose that because it's just quicker and easier not to. And it doesn't bring up all the feelings that disclosing might bring up. So I think it's really helpful to say something like, and you'll probably have better language for this than I might, because I'm sure you do this in a lot of ways, is a lot of people may have a sexual assault history, and often they haven't thought about the ways that might impact the pregnancy. We really want to help people who have had those experiences have a pregnancy that feels safe and comfortable for them. So that's why we ask these questions. Some version of explaining why we're asking this, and we're asking this to be able to assess for some additional struggles or challenges that folks with that history can have, so that we can provide some support and to be able to help you through that process, because sometimes things come up for people with that history, and we want to be able to be there to support individuals. And, as Nadia had said, you may not get a disclosure the first time or the second time. But in my experience, if people have an understanding of why you're asking that question, that it's not just out of curiosity or to check a box, then they're much more likely to, over time, to disclose that. And then encourage that open communication especially related. So once someone does disclose, being able to talk to them about, how do you feel that that history of sexual assault might impact your pregnancy at all? Is that already something that you've thought about? I would suspect that for many folks just coming in for the appointment that might involve a pelvic exam or any kind of exam like that is going to be challenging on some level because of the way that it may trigger past experiences. And all of the prenatal care throughout that process is going to include that as well. So as moving through that process, it's really important to encourage that open communication. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I'm asking what I'm asking. What concerns do you have? Planning on extra time to be able to say, if you have any questions, if you have anything you want to ask me, asking for permission. Is it all right if I touch your leg here? Is it all right if I do this? I know for myself, we get so comfortable with our jobs and our language and doing the things we do that it's just another day for us. And it's so important to be able to slow down and think about how might me touching this person's thigh be impacting them? How might each of the things I ask of them be really a significant impact for that person? So encouraging that open communication, encouraging them to ask questions, giving as much psychoeducation as you can, especially related to potential triggers. Also privacy. Of course, it's a trigger, right? So when we're in a medical setting, I had somebody just the other day who mentioned, and it was such a huge issue for them, that the curtain was pulled back when they were in the hospital, and there were people walking by that could see them as they were having, as they were partially dressed, and really asking, oh, can you shut that? Can you shut that? Oh, it'll just be a few minutes. Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, nobody can see you. And so just those reminders about things around that privacy and then that confidentiality. Again, we don't always know the relationship that people have to each other, whether it's in a parent, a caregiver, a partner. And so really being mindful of that confidentiality for that client as well. Familiarizing ourselves with community resources, all the ones that have been mentioned today, to be able to connect people with. Recognizing that we can provide ongoing information, but also connecting survivors to those resources for support is huge. In our therapy program, for example, it's not at all uncommon that we work with folks early on in the pregnancy to treat PTSD, or even pre-pregnancy ideally, but even early on in pregnancies or throughout, to treat PTSD. To help them prepare for that labor process through some exposure therapies, so that when they come to that experience, it can feel overwhelming and out of control in the best of situations. So those survivors can see it as an empowering experience rather than a re-traumatization that can lead to dissociation and impact how that person's going to relate then, and not only to their own body and bodily autonomy, to the provider, but also to their child. Providing that ongoing education, informed consent, that's an ongoing process. So again, engagement in the decision-making, being as clear as possible what that person may have control over or not, giving options whenever possible. When we get stressed and upset as care providers ourselves, it's really easy, especially if there's concerns around safety, to just move into a very medical focused role and forget about how can we give options to our clients, and being just mindful of that. Some other resources I just put in there is Penny Simpson, who you probably are all very familiar with. I think she recently passed away, unfortunately, but she wrote a really good book. It's an older book, but When Survivors Give Birth, Understanding and Healing the Effects of Early Sexual Abuse on Childbearing Women. And then another one that some of the quotes I mentioned before from, this again is an older article, and it is a qualitative study, not a quantitative study. It's got a pretty small group in it, but what I thought was really helpful as a therapist about this research, and that's the QR code is linked to that article. is it has a number of birthing individuals talking about how that birth experience paralleled the sexual assault for them in a way that just gave a lot of insight into what that experience is like for that survivor that can help us all in the way that we're serving clients. So those are there if you find those useful. Next slide, please.
I can speak for this one. The Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention is national organization. They have really, really amazing resources specifically for medical professionals talking about supporting survivors that have experienced strangulation. That is also a lethality indicator. And some of the things that they have on there are very specific to someone when they're pregnant. So that is an excellent resource. And again, it's written by medical professionals for medical professionals, and just a wealth of information. And then the other link on there also just talks more about, how do you respond to domestic violence in your health care setting. I believe that one talks through different tips around policies and procedures and conversations to have and what that screening process looks like. Are there other resources that you guys wanted to chime in, or are we ready for next slide?
Next slide. Okay, so thank you all. Any questions for any of us?
I'm happy to monitor the chat too, if you would prefer to put your question in the chat, but please feel free to raise your hand.
And those may be about the information presented, any of our agencies, whatever might be helpful.
If any of you are anything like me, it's as soon as we get off that you'll think of all sorts of things. So we can also just drop our helpline numbers in the chat if that's helpful. That's where you can refer clients that you're working with that may be experiencing and need to connect into us. And then if anything specific comes up, if you call our agencies and request to speak with us, we can help troubleshoot.
Oh, I think I see a hand up. Joanna?
Before we get to the hand, I'm going to ask a question that first came in through the chat, which would be, and then we'll call in Johanna. What would be the process for a person to get established with Crystal Judson?
Just walk in. That's one of the things that is unique about our agency is it's a walk-in model. So we take walk-ins Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 3:30. The advocates break for lunch from noon to 1, but the building is open. It's a safe place to be. We've got food, we've got a playroom, we've got a living room that folks can hang out in, so they can just walk in. If that seems too overwhelming and they want to call, with one of you on the phone to just learn more about what they do, they can just call our helpline to say, I've got someone who might need to connect into you. What kind of services do you do? How do they come in? If that makes it a little less scary. But otherwise, they can just walk on in.
Thanks, Nadia. Johanna.
I just mostly had a comment. I was struck by the statistic of homicide being the leading cause for for death for Black women ages 18 to 44. Did I get that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The statistics around Black women are horrendous. And that is why we, particularly want to make sure Black women are educated, and know that they have a resource available because the statistics for us are horrendous.
Thank you. I was I was kind of blown away by that. I had not heard that before. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question in the chat. How easy is it for clients to get into a DV shelter? Or the
That's a
DV
hard
shelter?
one to answer. What I will say is the need is higher than there are rooms for. And one of the things is someone is identifying that they're needing a DV shelter. We're talking through a variety of resources and options. We start with, Pierce County. If there's none available in Pierce County, we're talking with them about, is leaving Pierce County an option, and what is kind of the distance that you're wanting to look at going, so that we can look at surrounding counties. If that is not an option, we're talking through, what do family homeless shelters look like? Is family or friends a safe temporary option until, an availability comes up at a DV shelter? And some clients may say, that's an option I want to explore, or I don't want to explore, or I'll only explore, part of it, not all of those things. And if they say, I would rather stay in the home than explore certain shelter options, then we're talking about what does it look like for you to stay as safe as possible in whichever route that you're deciding to go. So that's a non-answer to your question. I'm sorry, I don't have a better one, but the need is higher than what availability is.
It's Nadia. Liza, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for sharing these valuable informations. Two questions I have. One of the biggest thing that we see folks in this sort of relationship not wanting to leave is financial, economic, basically reasoning. What is there? What kind of support can people get? Because sometimes if people leave, I literally had a woman who told me that she's reached out to DSHS, find out how much that she would be giving with her children if she were to, leave this person. And it was basically nothing, right? And she ended up staying with the person because she said financially it makes sense for me and my children. So what sort of, because it's great for us to, empower them, but there's a housing issue there. Do you know what I mean? And on the other hand is like these crazy statistics that person can actually die. You know what I mean? So it's like it's really I don't know. It really puts us in a really weird place. And my other question is, do you have any sort of programs for the perpetrators?
Kelly, do you want to start on that one,
I
or do
don't
you want me
mind.
to?
Yeah, I don't mind answering, starting on the first question. I think it's a really great question. It's very important. So one of the things that when we're looking for funding is having flexible funds available for victims. Yes, a lot of times they cannot leave because of the financial burden. So every so often, it's not consistent. There are something that comes out, DV Housing First Flex funds that come available. And this money is like it's flexible. It can be used for victims, even going back if their trauma is 20 years old. If it's impacting their ability to live healthy, sustainable lives, you are eligible for this funding. So when we're working with victims, we do assess how we can help. Sometimes there are flex funds available, sometimes they're not. It's just so I would encourage, when you have someone to reach out to us. We can see what's available. We do work with different community organizations like Coordinated Entry that can help with, they do prioritize domestic violence victims for safe and affordable housing. So I would just encourage you to seek assistance from community programs and just see what's available.
I would echo that. Is this idea of partnership and collaboration is huge, right? No one agency or one person is going to solve it all. And so it could be a combination of someone exploring what they might receive from DSHS, but maybe we're also referring them to some type of job training program, or like Kelly mentioned, coordinated entry, because that we have a specific group we refer to when there's domestic violence around that. So it's really that collaborative effort to provide support. And then the second half of the question was that about perpetrator treatment. Can you please repeat that part?
Yeah, like programs for them to do some sort of a rehabilitation.
So if someone calls our helpline and is looking for that, that's nothing that we do in-house. On DSHS's website, there is a list of programs. The easiest way to pull it up is to just in the search corner in the top, just to put in domestic violence treatment programs, and there's a list from there. A lot of times people engage in those when they're required to, right? There's a court case, a criminal case that's telling them that they have to go. Those are lengthy programs. It's not something where they go one time and everything is is wonderful. And so oftentimes in my experience, when I've heard of people going, it tends to be because there's some connection to a criminal case that's requiring them. I will say what we do not encourage is couples counseling. Couples counseling should be a safe space. And when there's that dynamic in the home, counseling is wonderful individually, but not when there's this dynamic happening. It shouldn't be happening as a couple.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question in the chat and then we'll move to Martitha. The question is, what domestic violence support groups are accessible? Maybe, Kyun, if you want to clarify that question. I think the question,
Yes,
yeah.
I was just saying that a lot of times people need support or a group where they can share stories or, experiences to feel like they're not alone in their situations or history for their healthy healing process to, feel like some sort of community family.
I'll say we have a group we're getting ready to start. I believe it's an 8-week group. It's going to be held via Zoom. Our group is really geared towards survivors when they're abusive, when they're away from their abusive partner, because they talk a lot about reestablishing boundaries. But we are just one group that is out there. Our sister's house has lots of wonderful groups, so I will turn it over to Kelli.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, we do offer several different support groups. We focus on healing. We use storytelling. A lot of our services are culturally specific, so we try to educate and then promote awareness and then concentrate on healing. So yes, you're absolutely right. Bringing women together so they can know they're not alone. It helps garner support. It helps encourage healing. And with our groups, we also have done yoga, we do art, we bring food. So healing looks like a lot of different things. So we just try to encompass all that to encourage healing through cultural awareness.
We also have a group just started, actually. We haven't had one in quite a while. It's a monthly group, again, focused on healing and developing coping skills, and as well our therapy program, which I know is different than a group. But I think I just want to make a pitch again for therapy that is specific to domestic violence and sexual assault and abuse. There are really effective treatments for PTSD. Not all providers have training in offering those treatments. So oftentimes I'll talk to folks who say, oh, I've done counseling, but they haven't necessarily done counseling that specifically focuses on PTSD. And there's some really great treatments that are available for that. So, yeah.
Martitha, why don't you ask your question, and then we have another one in the chat after you. I can't hear you. Is it just for me or others?
Oh, so sorry. I
Oh,
had it
now
on
I
mute.
can. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Everybody, hello. I had two questions. One is for the support groups. You mentioned that it's culturally, right, competency for the support groups that you provide. Support in different languages? And if so, what languages did you provide the support groups? You have it in Spanish as well? And the second question will be for rebuilding home, rebuilding house. Do you still have the office here in Bremerton? Where? And the contact information, please. Thank you.
Sure. Our support group currently right now is primarily in English. But if there is a need for Spanish, we do have a Spanish speaking advocate. And so we would be happy to either translate materials or have a translator there. So just let us know if that's something that you'd be interested in doing with us.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
we also offer a translator for groups if someone's coming to the group. We have a Spanish-speaking therapist, Eureka, who offers teletherapy for sexual assault survivors specifically in Spanish. And if you were thinking about our office in Bremerton, we do have an office in Bremerton that advocates and therapists will meet with clients out of, but the way that a client would access services in Kitsap County would be through calling that line as well. And then typically the advocates will go out to meet with them at different places at the courthouse or different places, or someone could do therapy in the Bremerton office or teletherapy. Most of our Kitsap clients most of our clients in general opt to do teletherapy. So, but either is an
Thank you,
option.
Stephanie. Would
Yeah,
you
and that is
share
in
the contact?
Bremerton. And then they also go to Port Orchard quite often to the courthouse and the Child Advocacy Center there.
There's also
Thank
a
you.
group
Thank you,
called
Stephanie. Would you share that contact information for Bremerton, Port Orchard, Bremerton office in the chat,
The
please?
Bremerton office is not as large as the Tacoma office. So there is no administrative person at the Bremerton office. So if someone is interested in the services and they're in Bremerton, I can put the number in the chat again, but they can just go to the website, go to our crisis line, and they'll be connected with an advocate. If they have a need in Bremerton for someone to come out and meet with them, then we have some Bremerton or some Kitsap advocates who can go out and meet with them. So it's the same number, just to make it easier.
I have it. Yes. Thank you. Thank you,
Oh,
Stephanie.
good.
Appreciate it.
There is a group called Juntas that's in Pierce County. It was previously held by a program called Catherine Place, but is now being housed by Tacoma Community House. And while it's not DV, like it's not 100% we're talking about DV, it's a support group for Latina women in general, but they do talk about domestic violence as a part of that and help connect in. I can dig up the correct number to connect for that, but that's currently being held by Tacoma Community House called Juntas.
Thank you. I have another question for you all from the chat. Is it true that to get into a DV shelter, the family must be actively in a DV situation or a home within the past 24 hours?
Each shelter is different. I can't speak for them just because they're different agencies. Some shelters do say that there needs to be something that's happened, within the past 72 hours. But most DV shelters, when they're screening, there needs to be active domestic violence. So if it's something where there was domestic violence, 6 to 9 months ago, even though that may be connected, the need for housing, but if there's no current safety concerns, then they may not be able to screen in. But that would be a question that would be best directed towards the individual shelters to talk through what their policies are.
Thanks. There's lots of questions about resources in the chat, and the slides presented here will be online on our website at tpchd.org/PCPC. And Stephanie, Kelly, and Nadia, feel free to put your resource web pages in the chat. I think folks would really love that. And this presentation is recorded and everything will be posted to our website. We don't offer CEUs for this meeting, I'm sorry. We do have time for one or two more questions if anyone wants to jump in. Maybe there's something I missed. All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Stephanie, Kelly, and Nadia. You have a lot of love in the chat for you all. The work that you are doing is life-saving and powerful and intergenerationally healing. And we are very grateful for you for sharing your work with us today. Thank you. I would love to introduce LaRhonda Osborn, who comes to us from the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department. LaRhonda, are you going to be sharing your own slides?
Yes, I am. How are
I'm
you
going to
guys
give you
today?
power right now. Thank you. All right, you should have the power to share. And if you have trouble or whatever, Kendra can do it.
Let's try that. How about that?
Good to go. Good to go. All right, without further ado, Miss LaRhonda Osborn.
Well, good morning. My name is, like she said, LaRhonda Osborn, and I'm the Child Mortality Prevention Coordinator for Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department. A little background about myself is I've been doing child death reviews for a little over 20 years. I started my career not only as a nurse within the hospitals and different clinics, but I also went into autopsies, and I was a death investigator for over 15 years. And after that, I started doing donor services and also doing not only child death reviews, but death reviews for the hospitals, period. And so this has always been a part of my life, and I have passion for how can we stop children from dying? What is it going to take for us to protect our kids? So I've always had passion in that. But today I want to share a little bit of a historical perspective of, why these deaths are occurring for African American infants and why they are the highest. I'm not a scholar at all, and I'm not a doctor, but I have a passion for finding out the why. If we find out the why and the root of the cause, maybe we can also help anyone in need that is having this type of situation going on in their culture. What can we do to stop the death rates for our SUID and our SIDS deaths, and especially in African American infants, since they lead the nation in the highest here in the United States. So today I would like is it going to work for me? Hello. Sorry about that. My button was slow to react. About the history of infant deaths, some mechanisms that they've used for prevention, what was working at the time, and a little bit of data about some risk factors and evidence-based recommendations. So even though we know that this type of death affects all children of all races, every child matters. And the work that I do is for every child, not just for Black infants, but for every child in Pierce County. With the history of infant deaths, we know that babies are still dying suddenly and unexpectedly since the beginning of human existence. These unfortunate incidents were even talked about and mentioned in the Bible. 1 Kings 3:19 states that during the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him, and that's the New King James Version. From the first century, Egyptian mothers who slept with their infants were held responsible if they died, as the mother was considered guilty of intentionally smothering the infants. And in the 1200s in Germany, mothers were forbidden to take an infant under 3 years old into the bed at night with them. This is happening in Egypt. There are stories in Babylon, Greece, Rome, all types of discussions of overlaying, all the way into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, where the church began punishing women by either excommunication or making them do penances for this type of death. In antebellum Virginia, infant mortality was extremely high within the decades of 1850s, and that's where this is going to get started. So some of the theories that they used to have when this would happen would be called either overlaying, smothering, infanticide, suffocation by bedclothes, thymic causes, or some even would say touched by the hand of God. So this has been going on for centuries, and each century they would have a different theory of why it's happening. Because throughout most of human existence, mothers and their infants have shared the same sleeping space with close physical contact, she could provide the infant with needed warmth and nutrition, as well as protection from predators. Thus, the practice referred to as co-sleeping was essential to infant survival, and we've since changed that word. And however, during the most recent millennia change, the essence of evolution occurred in many aspects of human behavior. As the nomadic life was abandoned, different environments and climates were adapted to, permanent dwellings were built, and cribs of primitive types were made for infants to sleep separately from their mother. Thus, co-sleeping became more of a matter of a choice for the mother than a behavior pattern required for the infant's survival. However, from the time of co-sleeping as an alternative practice, it became an issue associated with turbulence and controversy, which persists to this very day. Bed sharing is non-industrialized societies called the 20th century. The term bed sharing came to replace co-sleeping because it seems more specific to mothers sharing their sleeping space with their infants. So the question of bed sharing has been addressed during the past century from cross-cultural anthropological studies. These have made available data on many aspects of different cultures, such as the physical environment, social and family structure, and eating and sleeping practices. But African American culture still struggle with this practice, and in some cities is still being unjustly criminalized for these occurrences. So here's a mechanism of prevention. For the past 100 to 200 years, there have been different inventions that have been implemented to try and change the practice and reduce infant death. Though cradles existed for millennia to hold infants during the day, babies slept with their mothers at night for the most of human history, and still do to many parts in this world. A half barrel with all but 3 slats removed, one on each side and one on the top, was probably the world's first device designed for nighttime sleep. It was called an arcuccio or arcutio. It's Italian for little arch. This 17th century creation was put on the mother's bed with the baby inside, allowing a mother to sleep and breastfeed through the night without the possibility of rolling over onto her infant or having her infant roll out of bed. Even though the Artucio didn't catch on worldwide, but it was suggested as an apparatus to prevent the overlaying of infants in 1895, when British Parliament debated penalizing mothers whose infants died next to them in bed. Babies then usually slept with their mothers for a few months and after birth because homes weren't well heated. So the inventions of that era were sleep services that could be attached to either side of the bed, much like today's co-sleepers and bedside baby cribs. The most bizarre crib in patented category with bedside co-sleepers is the window crib. The first, but certainly not only patented for such a crib, appeared in 1919, not long after American pediatrician Luther Emmett Holt insisted in his book, The Care and Feeding of Children, that fresh air is required to renew and purify the blood, and that those who sleep out of doors and are stronger children. So what were city dwellers' parents supposed to do? They put babies in a cage suspended out the window, much like an air conditioner unit, of course. Eleanor Roosevelt used one of these in her townhouse window for her daughter, Anna, until a neighbor threatened to report her for child cruelty. And Eleanor said, "This was a shock to me." And she wrote in her autobiography, "For I thought I was being the most modern mother." Thankfully, we aren't airing babies out of windows anymore. But as you can buy infant tents for nap time at the beach, pack and plays, there are so many other items that you can buy now to keep babies safe and sound. So let's talk about what was happening to African Americans and why African American children were leading the country in infant mortality. So co-sleeping infants sharing with the mother's sleep space was prevailed throughout human evolution and continued over the centuries of Western civilization, despite controversy and blame for co-sleeping mothers for the deaths of their infants. During antebellum slavery, Black mothers had no choice but to bed share with their infants because they predominantly lived in a one-room shack shared by up to 5 to 10 people, including adults and children. So the infant mortality was significantly high. 30 to 50% of enslaved infants died within the first year of life. And the risk factors for that were poor nutrition, disease, harsh working conditions during pregnancy, and definitely no access to health care. So without a well-developed field of pediatrics, white physicians had little to offer. Consequently, they often blame enslaved mothers and midwives using harsh gendered and racist language for infant death that were merely likely a result to a mother's hard labor and poor nutrition. Beyond these verbal attacks, antebellum U.S. physicians also began to use their access to Black and enslaved bodies to expand their scientific knowledge and build their professional reputations. And if anybody want to research further on that, look up the eugenics crusade. So this continued throughout history, through the century, antebellum slavery, through Reconstruction era, because 50% of infants died within the first year during Reconstruction between 1863 and 1877. During the Jim Crow laws, and in 1960 through 64, Black infant death rate was 1 times higher than in non-Jim Crow areas. Black mothers were being criminalized because of these deaths up until 1976, when Dr. Hannah C. Kinney, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few weeks ago at a conference in Houston, wrote a published medical report on her reflections of a career in pediatric neuropathy. And what Dr. Kinney said was she was seeing a rise in every time a Black mother came into the hospital with a dead infant, law enforcement was instantly putting them in jail until she finally said something and said, hey, you can't do that. We don't know what happened to this baby. You need to wait until the autopsy was finished. So Dr. Hannah Kinney was definitely instrumental in bringing together law enforcement with the medical examiner and understanding not all Black women are killing their babies. And so she was definitely a part of that era of making sure that Black women were not being criminalized for losing their baby to SUID or SIDS deaths. So some of the risk factors that continued throughout the history was segregation, cause of racial disparities, structural racism, and criminalization. So we have to ask what made a difference, because at one point it was always at this highest and then it dropped. So associations were explored between the abolition of Jim Crow laws, which were state laws legalizing racial discrimination, and they were overturned by 1964, the U.S. Civil Rights Act, and birth cohort tends to infant death rates. So during the Voting Rights Act, it led to a reduction in Black infant deaths in southern counties that had severe voter suppression practices. Civil Rights Act of 1964, Black women were given state Medicaid programs, so now they had access to health care. Economic progress, they were working, they were buying homes, life was getting a little better, so therefore the risk factors were reduced, and therefore you can see a significant drop of Black infant deaths recorded in 1970. The death rate fell to its lowest point in 1970. From 1915 to 1919, the rate was 95.7% deaths for each 1,000 infants. And in 1950, it was 29.2. And in 1960, it was 26.0. And in 1970, for each 1,000 live births, it was 19.8 compared to 20.7 for each 1,000 in 1969. And according to a New York Times article on March of 1971, American infant rate dropped to a record low in 1970. In another article in the New York Times in 2018, it had the big front story today about appalling racial gaps for infant mortality. Infant mortality in general has gone down substantially since World War II, but the racial gap has actually increased. In 1950, according to the CDC, the Black rate of infant mortality was 64% higher than the white rate. Today, it's actually 133% higher. So looking at National Vital Statistics report from July 2024, according to this, in 2022, infant mortality continued to vary by race. Infants of Black women had the highest mortality rate, 10.9, followed by infants of American Indian and Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, Hispanic women, and which was 4.89, white 4.52, and Asian 3.51. Infants of Black women also had the highest neonatal mortality rate in 2022, 6.44, compared with infants of other race and Hispanic origin groups. The lowest mortality rate for infants of Asian women was 2.47. Unfortunately, SIDS rose for the Black infants during the early pandemic, and the cause of it is just simply unknown. Despite a record low infant mortality rate in 2020, a new study found that an unexpected jump in unexplained deaths in Black infants during the first year of the coronavirus epidemic. The rate of SIDS or sudden death syndrome increased by 15% in a single year, from 33.3 deaths per 1,000 babies born in 2009 to 38.2 such deaths in 2020, according to this research. So you ask yourself why? Why is this still happening? And antebellum slavery is over. Jim Crow is over. All of Reconstruction is over. So 100 years later, why is this still happening to Black infants? But research has documented that social and economic factors such as racism and chronic stress contribute to poor maternal and infant health outcomes, including higher rates of perinatal depression and preterm birth among Black women and higher rates of mortality among Black infants. So we call this generational trauma risk factors if we want to look at the why. Black women are always in a hypervigilant state. And I can speak to this from example. Even though we may not see or we may not be in slavery, we are still being, and I say we as a Black woman, are still sometimes in situations and places that we're still treated as if we're less than. Which is always a hyper-vigilant state that a person is in, and that constantly stresses on you. The chronic stress of it. It's the interpersonal racism within our personal and work life. Still, in 2025, healthcare discrimination. The unemployment that can make anyone be chronically stressed. Family discord, crowded housing, single parent, food insecurities, and like you all were talking about before, family violence. And you also have to ask, why are Black men being so violent to their Black women? There's also environmental toxins, redlining. They used to put Black families in areas where there was smoke, smog from factories, from pig farms, and you also had to deal with that. And that's not healthy for the body. So there was all these circumstances and different things that were making it risk factors for why there was such a high mortality rate between Black infants. Since the 1990s, research on maternal and infant death disparities have increasingly pointed to structural racism in a society at large as a stressor that harms African American women at both psychological and genetic levels, and conditions such as hypertension, which have been linked to the stress of living in a racist society, contribute to these disparities in pregnancy-related complications such as eclampsia. These detrimental health effects of daily life are then further compounded by racial discrimination and disregard within the medical institutions. Black people have a right to be suspicious of an institution that has historically victimized their ancestors for centuries. It is up to all of us, but especially the medical doctors and public health professionals, to decolonize obstetrics and gynecology specifically, and American medicine more broadly, and to apply comprehensive anti-racist policies in the prevention of Black people's death. And that's something that we can start on. And if we want to continue to talk about contributing factors, we're not just going to put all the blame on systemic measures. We also have to look at, too, families' resistance in adopting safe sleep recommendations. When we think of education, what is the cultural upbringing for most Black families? We used to not have a sense of, or we had a lack of community, where we had a community and Black women like myself, when my daughter was born, was told, I remember going to the doctor and the doctor said the baby needs to be on their back and nothing in the bed. And this was 1997. Well, when I got the baby home, grandmother and mother states, well, I had all my kids on their stomach and they were fine. None of them died. It's that thinking, that cultural upbringing thinking, and that we've shared for generations to generation that needs to change. So when we're looking at educating our different cultures, we have to be culturally competent to know that in African American cultures, this is also told to these women. So therefore, when we think of education, bring in grandma, bring in mom, bring in anyone who's going to be a care provider for that infant, so they will know the dangers of putting the infant on their stomach and making sure, and even having all of the bears and the blankets in the bed that's not safe anymore. Because again, like we were talking about, the systemic racism and why Black women are fearful of the doctor. If they do come, at least they can be educated on the right way to keep their baby safe and healthy. Because in recent years, research and news reports have raised attention to the effects of provider discrimination during pregnancy and delivery. News reporting and maternal mortality cases reviews have called attention to a number of maternal and infant deaths and near misses among women of color, where providers did not or were slow to listen to patients. A recent report determined that discrimination defined as treating someone differently based on the class, group, or category they belong to due to biases, stereotypes, and prejudices contributed to 30% of pregnancy-related deaths in 2020. In one study, Black and Hispanic women reported the highest rates of mistreatment, such as shouting and scolding, ignoring, or refusing requests for help during the course of their pregnancy. So this is something that we need to think about, that this is the reason why it has happened, and where we can definitely try to lower these numbers within Black infants if we know how to, when in educating them, know how to effectively get them to unlearn a lot of generational cultural knowledge that they gained from family members that just simply didn't know. So when we think about evidence-based recommendations, we look at what can we do to help lower this rate for Black infants. And according to a study from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, contributing upstream risk factors must be addressed as we attempt to eliminate racial differences in infant mortality. We must continually translate epidemiological data into enforceable public health policies by actively engaging in today's policymakers and providing transparent data to them, such as continue to investigate the links between social and biological determinants of infant mortality, improve educational opportunities by a trusted source. If you go and look up, if there are some cultures that don't trust the doctors of the hospital, where can I go in my neighborhood to a community or a community center that of people that look just like me, where I feel trusted enough to hear what they have to say of how I should protect my infant, and I will be able to do exactly what I need to do to protect my child because I trust the source. Economic empowerment of Black families, create safer home environments. When we as Black African Americans are not allowed to own our own businesses or get jobs that we want because of some other reason, this causes failure and heartache within the Black community, which then turns into chronic stress and it just keeps snowballing down. But if we create safer home environments, where, things can get better. And we saw how it got better when Black people were getting jobs after the 1964 Voters' Rights Act. Once we were able to get Medicaid, get health care, start working and buying jobs, doing good for ourselves, then the death rate lowered because now we're happy, we're thriving, and Black women and Black families are doing what they can to protect, they have the resources to protect their children. And messaging and education, family members, grandparents. Like I said, when we talk about educating, let's get grandma in there. Let's get, if great grandma is still alive, let's get her in there, because these women are essential in the African American culture, that this woman is going to listen to what grandma says before she listens to what the doctor says. So improve educational opportunities, professional training, economic empowerment of Blacks will directly narrow gaps in infant mortality rate, racial disparity, and also create safer home environments. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. But I also put my references in here as well. I did a lot of research for this, so.
Thank you so much, LaRhonda. We have time for one question, and there's one in the chat. But also, if you would prefer to live questions, up to you.
It's whatever anyone wants to ask. If you have any questions.
Someone asked, do you have any data to support the idea that Black men are being so violent to Black women?
No, that was just a comment. Just listening to what I had heard earlier, I have not done my research on that. I'm just talking from experience of what I know within my own Black community, that when I do see that, I understand what's happening. It goes deeper, but no, I don't have the data. That was just an observation.
Thank you so much. So LaRhonda's email is on the screen, and LaRhonda, if you don't mind, monitoring the chat, if some other questions come in, that would be great. And then if we, you know what, let's take this one question and then we'll move on. And then we can also come back after Karina's presentation. But so there's a last question for you, LaRhonda. Where can members of the Black community and all parents find best safe sleep education?
That's a good question. You can find best sleep education anywhere. I know Erin Suma does the talk with Mary Bridge. It's there. The issue is you have to understand the culture in order to understand how to make sure that the information that we have is understood. You see what I'm saying? Because the work is there. The way that they present how safe sleep is actually perfect. It's a matter of, yes, this woman who is having this baby, or I'm not going to say just woman, or these caregivers are having this baby. You also want to bring in your parents. You also want to bring in your grandparents, because those are the ones that you need to convince that this actually works. But the safe sleep information everywhere is accurate and correct and the best practice. It's just a matter of, you have to get within the culture and be a trusted source in order for them to receive the information that they need.
Well said. And then Chris Laddish put that information, a link to it from Mary Bridge in the chat to go along with what LaRhonda was just saying. Cheers. Thank you so much, LaRhonda. Really appreciate you and the work you're doing, and the team that you have brought together to review infant deaths and children's deaths in Pierce County. If you are someone that is on our Child Prevention Mortality Committee in Pierce County, we are very, very grateful for you. Thank you for the support you provide, LaRhonda. Okay, Karina, are you going to share your slides, or is Kendra?
I'm going to share my slides.
Great.
Yes,
well, I'm going to give you the power to do so.
Okay, thank you. And let me just find my way here. And
so as you do that, our final presentation is from Karina Kull, who will introduce herself. She is a student at UW. She and I have been working really closely together for the last 6 months. And really on behalf of a large consortium of organizations. And the Bessler Center, which hosted the Healthy Birth Summit last year. I apologize if you can hear a sick kid in the background screaming, but we identified that there was a lot of providers. A lot of you have been telling us that it's really hard to get families connected to services. It's really hard to know and trust if that family gets connected once you've done the referral. And so Karina has done an incredible job trying to survey many of us to understand what our experiences, successes, challenges in trying to get families connected to services. And then from this, we hope that there can be some action for each of us in our agencies, as well as how we coordinate and work together as a system across the county to try to reduce the barriers and make it easier for families to get connected to the services that they need. So, Karina, thank you for the incredible work that you've done. This is your first presentation of this work, and it has been no small feat. And on behalf of the health department and all of us in the collaborative, thank you for your work and congratulations on your soon-to-be doctorate.
Thank you, Jax. Okay, well, yeah, it's been great working with y'all. I just want to ask, can you guys see them in presentation view? I'm not super Zoom savvy.
You're good to go.
Okay, I'm good to go. Okay, great. Okay. Alrighty. So my name is Karina Kull, and I am a Doctor of Nursing practice student from the University of Washington. And for my DNP capstone project, I've chosen to partner with some great organizations in Pierce, such as the Health Department, PCCN, and 211. And as Jax mentioned, we're looking to understand successful connection of families with young children to social services. And I'll give you a little background of kind of why the project was done, kind of like review that a bit, and then briefly discuss the design and spend most of our time talking about the survey and interview results and recommendations for improvement to our current linkage systems. And I think the one thing we can all agree upon here is parenting young children is a uniquely stressful time. We know when families are vulnerable, whether that's from poverty, substance use, or the feeling of the effects of systemic racism, parenting is just that much more challenging. Parent-child health services provide support for marginalized or vulnerable families. And these services can be anywhere from phone visits to intensive in-home support. And these programs have been found to improve health outcomes, health equity, maternal life force, and child development, and improve connecting families to other community resources. And prior to the pandemic, we know that there were ongoing issues of systemic inequality, mental health, opioid use challenges across the US. And we know that the pandemic dramatically exacerbated these things. For example, in the state, opioid-related deaths increased by over 2.5 times from the pre-pandemic rates. Service connection has long been a consistent challenge across the US, with care consistently fragmented in our current healthcare system. Requires care coordinators to step in and assist families in connecting with needed resources. Service connection difficulties have become more pronounced too since the pandemic. So Pierce has shared in these challenges. I connected with Jax this fall, and they introduced me to this challenge to me. Shared with me that through the Bessler Center Healthy Baby Summit this summer, improvement in service connection was known to be a priority in the service agencies in Pierce County. There was also this desire to improve the collaboration and linking process in the community to get families connected with the resources that they wanted and requested. So TPCHD, Pierce County Early Childhood Network, and United Way 211 of Pierce County kind of partnered together in this interest to better understand the resource linking processes in Pierce County. So this project kind of came out of that interest. So that's a little background on things. So overall, the purpose of this project was to understand the current process and workflow, what's working and not working, and successfully connecting a family with young children to desired social services in Pierce County. Really focusing in on families where the parent is pregnant or has at least one child age 0 to 3, and where the parent has complex needs, such as behavioral health concerns or substance use disorder or other concerns. So to understand these current practices, barriers, and facilitators of connecting families to social services in Pierce County, we decided to survey and interview service providers, the people who are regularly connecting these families to social services. So an online survey for service providers was developed based on some great input from PCECN, 211, and TPCHD. And this survey was shared with service providers of Pierce County working in healthcare, schools, daycares, shelters, carceral facilities, and service agencies, community-based organizations. And phone interviews were performed with a few of the survey respondents as well. So there's like 3 to 4 main domains that we asked folks about on the surveys and interviews. We asked people what tools they're using, why they're using them, what's working about them. We then kind of dug into challenges a bit, challenges in identifying the right service. After that service was identified for a family, we want to know what challenges folks had in experience in linking the family to the service after the correct service was identified. And then we asked service providers if there were challenges they had linking families to certain resources. And then we asked about what helpful practices they're doing that others should be doing, some facilitators and linking that they wanted to share. And then we gave folks space to share their improvement recommendations as well. So we got 63 survey responses. And just to note, I share all of the as I share all the results, folks were able to select all that apply that apply to them. So you'll see that percentages don't add up to 100% because folks were able to select a couple options. So here are some basic characteristics, I guess, to start about the survey respondents. For agency type, most folks responded working in healthcare, public health, community-based organizations, and that was followed closely by schools and childcare. For roles held, survey participants most commonly selected roles such as resource navigators, supervisors or administrators, and nurses that applied to them. And then that was followed by community health workers and social workers. So we got a good variety of folks who likely do this work on a regular basis. And 4 participants agreed to interview. I spoke with a family resource navigator from a family resource center. I spoke with a case manager from a homeless service agency. I spoke with a public health nurse who did in-home visits. And then I spoke with a clinical quality program manager for health plan Medicaid. So we have several tools and processes commonly used by service providers in Pierce County. And before I share what tools folks stated they commonly used, I thought I would make sure everyone is familiar with these linkage tools. And the links are available here, and I can also put them in the chat after the presentation too. So family resource centers. So Pierce County has 10 family resource centers funded by TPCHD, and each are staffed by navigators and will work directly with families to link them with services. And then we have South Sun 211, also referred to as United Way 211 of Pierce County. And many folks are familiar with this, where you or the family can call 211 to connect with a resource navigator. And then there's also an online database on their website where you can search for resources directly. I think there's also an email that you can reach out to as well. And TPCHD or the health department can also be a helpful tool for linking families with resources. They have some good resource lists, and the maternal child outreach team is an example of a really useful linking tool for families who are pregnant or who have young children. And then we have Parent Help 123, which is a useful search tool through Help Me Grow, where you or the family can search for a resource on their online database. And then the PCECN provider referral form. This was formed from a partnership between Pierce County Early Childhood Network and 211, where you can refer a family to services through filling out an online form on the behalf of the family. A 211 resource navigator will follow up with the family then within 48 hours of that referral being placed. And then some in-house options. Then, of course, we know folks, many use the in-house social worker, in-house community health worker, or their own in-house resource list to link families with resources. So these are the main linkage tools we asked our service providers about. And yeah, you can access more info about the tools at the links provided. So moving on to their responses here. As you can see, family resource centers were the most commonly used linkage tool. 60% of folks reported using these to help link families. And then 211, TPCHD, and our in-house resources were all pretty close in their usage in that 42 to 47% range. And then Parent Help 123 at 34%. And then the PCECN provider referral form was only used about 22% of respondents. And then 17% of folks reported using a tool not listed there. So now that we know which tools most people like most often use, we wanted to know why do they use them and what about them is working? So these are like kind of the three main themes folks frequently talked about. First, service providers like to user-friendly, efficient, and trustworthy tools and processes. People like the easy to use, efficient tools. So they like a tool that's not clunky, does not take up a lot of their time. People also like a tool they can trust. That can mean the tool or process was familiar to them or that it involved interacting with an expert. Secondly, the service providers liked a tool or process that created that desired connection reliably and efficiently. So, not surprisingly, people like a tool or process that actually works, where they know it will create their desired outcome. They want to know they can trust the tool will reliably create that desired link with the service, and they don't want the connection to take forever for the family. They want the connection to be immediate if possible, or pretty quick. And then lastly, some secondary outcomes folks cared about. They liked that their linkage processes resulted in relationship building within the community, that they were making lasting relationships between agencies. And then others liked their tools and processes because it placed the tools into the hands of the families and gave them the tools to self-navigate, which some families wanted. So those are the main themes of why folks like their tools or processes. So we're kind of moving over into challenges next. So next we asked service providers what challenges they had in identifying the right service. The most common response was, I don't trust that my client will be followed up with. And this was followed by, the whole process takes too much time. Um, and sorry. Yeah, this is followed by the whole process takes too much time, followed by the internet-based um, databases are too clunky or complex to navigate. The service that my client desires does not exist. The list I have is not up to date. I don't trust that the reference tool I'm using is accurate or up to date. The whole process is mentally taxing to complete. Or lastly, I don't know where to look for available services. And then 19% of folks gave other reasons. 1 second. Okay. And then service providers reported a couple of challenges using certain tools. So for 211, several providers found 211 was challenging to use, reporting that it was sometimes difficult to reach someone, whether that was them or the family waiting on hold for a long time, or calls being dropped. Other folks more thought it seemed like 211 didn't have enough resources or that they were overtaxed. And several folks stated 211 did not provide up-to-date resources. And then, despite this, this is still the second most reportedly used tool. About 40, I think about 45 or so percent of folks were using this still. And the PCECN provider referral form, there was overall pretty low familiarity with this referral form. Only 22% of survey respondents reported using that. And this is consistent with the interviews where only 1 out of 4 interviewees used the provider referral form. So next, we asked service providers what challenges they had in linking the family to the service they had successfully identified. We gave folks about 18 to 20 different options to select, and these were the top 7 responses listed here. We asked about availability, accessibility, family engagement, and follow-up as kind of 4 main domains that all these different answers fit under. And where most folks answered was in the domains of accessibility and family engagement. So the most common response was an accessibility related answer, which is due to transportation or childcare related reasons. And then our second one here was a family engagement related answer. The family does not reach out to the provider. So that was followed by, due to insurance or income qualifications. You never hear confirmation of service enrollment after referral sent. The family reports they never heard from or can't get a hold of the provider. And then our last two listed here is the wait list was too long or it was not in their preferred language. We next asked service providers which resources were most challenging to link families with in Pierce County. We gave them a list of over 20 resources to choose from, and these were the top 8 resources that were challenging to link with. The most common response was housing support, at 82% of folks reporting that this was challenging to link families with. And this was followed by financial support at 71%, mental health support at 58%, transportation at 54%, and then followed by childcare, substance use treatment, childbirth and parenting classes, and diapers. And before moving into what folks recommended for improvement, it's important I touch on the numerous strengths folks discussed about the Pierce County community. I think first, many service providers discussed their communities pulling together to support families in need. Several folks discussed how the rural communities in particular pull together and collaborate with community events and kind of bridging gaps. Many discussed how despite the challenges, a lot of individuals and organizations put in a lot of extra efforts and go out of their way to help families requesting assistances. Communities are pulling together too to bridge resource gaps, such as helping out families with transportation to distant or out of the way services. And another strength here were the individual practices of linking. There are a lot of individuals and organizational practices of linking that folks do to support families intentionally. There are numerous direct supports that organizations provide to families, such as interpretation, one-on-one support, or connecting to a service on the behalf of the family. And there's some folks that are passionate about building autonomy in the family, educating them on resources available, encouraging them to call on their own, to equip them to navigate the system on their own if needed in the future as well. And then some service providers talk about prioritizing really good follow-up, having frequent check-ins with families to ensure they are connected to the service and feel supported as well. And I just want to take a moment to share a few resources in the community that were mentioned as being particularly helpful and good to work with. Here's like a few quotes. The diaper banks are phenomenal. This is a great model to follow. We know family resource centers are a reliable source for diapers, multilingual supports, and community connections. And First Five Fundamentals offers such great supports. So those are some of the community strengths folks talked about. So there's really a lot of great things the community here is doing. And kind of moving from there, folks had some recommendations about what they could see improve in the Pierce County service connection process. So service providers, basically people commonly discuss wanting to improve the central online database. They're looking for one that is accessible to both families and providers, and they are additionally interested in a type of referral portal for tracking referrals, something where the referrals placed can be tracked in a central manner. And then service providers additionally wanted their databases to show a timestamp of when they were last updated. Several folks discussed frustrations of going on searches where the resources they said were available were not available, and where they called a phone number and no one answered that line. So for transparency purposes, having some type of timestamp on contact information or when the resource was updated was requested by a couple folks. And then service providers wanted overall improved organizational collaboration. They wanted more opportunities to talk amongst themselves. They wanted more interagency coordination and resource sharing, referral sharing. And folks additionally wanted better follow-up for the families. A lot of folks admit follow-up is not within their current capacity, and many say the current systems are not set up to allow follow-up, whether that's due to lack of referral tracking or lack of the time to perform the task. And then language accessibility was discussed by service providers a lot as well. Several folks discussed how Common resource web pages did not have non-English language options, and others discussed how there was a need for more bilingual providers. And then an increase of resources and service providers. These were really pervasive comments throughout the surveys and interviews as improvement recommendations. So housing and transport were two big ones discussed, and a desire for more service providers in general was reported by folks, specifically several folks desiring increase in navigators, community health workers, to name a few. So now that we've reviewed what service providers have said, here are some recommendations I've developed based on the great input I got from them. So the first recommendation is to improve some aspects of the United Way of Pierce County 211 website and database. Folks mentioned they had some challenges with knowing if resources were available and contact information was updated. So like some of the providers recommended, I suggest we add some timestamps onto the search resources of when they were last updated in the database, specifically on like the contact information, whether that's the email or phone number, and then a timestamp on whether or not the resource is active and when that was updated. And then language accessibility was noted to be, language accessibility was noted to be an area of concern for folks. So a recommendation is to add non-English options onto the 211 webpage, or increase the noticeability if that's already present. Service providers wanted to ensure families and providers could look at the same resource. So this could allow the resources to be accessible to both providers and families. Adding this in could also help folks who don't speak English navigate for services a touch on their own if they wanted to. And I think there is a need for improved language accessibility. It sounds like in many resource web pages across Pierce County. So adding this change to 211 is, I think, a good place to start. And then we know that the PCCN provider referral form can be filled out on the family's behalf, and a 211 navigator will reach out to the family within 48 hours. And we know several folks did have some concerns about, long wait times at 211, and I do imagine 211 gets high call volumes. So a great way kind of to mitigate some of these frustration folks had could be harnessing the PCCN provider referral form, harnessing this tool, increasing its visibility. And I also know a lot of folks aren't using this provider referral form, and a lot of people don't know about it. So I think adding an easily accessible PCECN provider referral form link to the 211 webpage, I think would be helpful. Whoa. Okay. And where was I? Okay. And then I think then the last improvement to the 211 website would be the addition of a provider referral portal. So several service providers voiced wanting a way to track referrals. And with this portal, the referring provider would have a way to centrally visualize if the family had been contacted to the referred to service. So this could also trigger a follow-up reminder to a designated navigator as well. And I'll let that bring us into our next recommendation. So a follow-up campaign for good follow-up practices, ensuring to communicate a timeline. Transparent timeline for follow-up should be provided to families, and this can help build trust between the family and the provider. And then accountability, establishing the standard, the follow-up, reestablishing the standard. So like the follow-up should be performed by the referring provider, which I understand there are so many reasons why follow-up is challenging, capacity reasons, there's no referring systems in place. So I'd encourage folks to explore constraints in their organizations that hinder follow-up. What are some quality improvements or system level changes that can occur, which could be helpful in ensuring that follow-up can fit into their workflow. And then my third recommendation is for community collaboration events for service providers and agencies. I know there are some events out there which are already creating some opportunities for resource sharing. I think that the next step to ensure there are ample opportunities for interagency relationship building. And additionally, these events could be great opportunities for agency marketing, letting others know your services are there, and ultimately with a goal to improve referrals between organizations and strengthening community relationships, giving space for special opportunities for new agencies in the community to be highlighted as well. And then fourth, the next recommendation is an advocacy opportunity. It was really clear that increasing housing support was a priority amongst service providers. 82% of service providers responded that the housing support was difficult to link with families in Pierce County. Lots of people discussed this in the surveys and interviews as well. I'd encourage you all who are interested in this advocacy work to look into supporting affordable housing development policies, contacting local representatives, and joining housing advocacy groups such as the Tacoma-Pierce County Coalition to End Homelessness. And then my last recommendation is a resource navigation education campaign. I think one thing that was clear is a lot of service providers have varying levels of familiarity with the available tools within Pierce County. I think a great way to increase that familiarity and improve the systematic use of the linkage tools would be to create some community trainings. And I think a great way to do this could be to integrate linkage tool trainings into PCPC meetings. So for example, like one meeting, a 211 resource navigator who is an expert in the 211 website and database could come in and provide a training to assist other service providers in using their tool and show us their tricks and how to efficiently and effectively connect families. So I'll end on this note. This was such a great opportunity to work with service providers, hear people's stories, hear about the hard work people are putting in to support families across Pierce. I know many folks here took the survey. Just want to say thank you for giving me your great feedback about how things are going. And yeah, I guess I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Karina. I really, really appreciate the work that you've done. We have time for one question for Karina right now. And Karina, you can put your email in the chat and folks can also send their chat. I see some applause. Really incredible doctoral work. While folks are thinking about a question that they might have, I want to acknowledge that today led with two really heavy topics that may have been triggering or stressful or overwhelming to experience. And we needed to keep moving through those and then jumped into resource navigation. And that can feel really overwhelming and not feel like you've got the time and the break. And so I thank you for sticking through this with us. I'll also say that we followed this conversation by talking about the impact and the ramifications of racial violence and the impact that that has on our children. And so this was a really heavy day. And Karina's work around trying to figure out how we can take care of our families and get our families connected to services and improve how we support families and getting them connected to the services that they need. That includes culturally and racially aligned services and ensuring our families can get connected to DV support right away. All of this is connected, and I thank you for your patience as we moved through this today and learn from each other and the incredible work happening in our community. Chris, please.
Yeah, Karina, I just wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you to you and Jax and PCCN and I mean, everybody that worked with you to kind of elevate this because while it was a big lift, doing the summit was really the easy work. You know, it was fun. We got to bring everybody together. But as I said at the end, it's only going to be worth it if we have something to show for it. And you really took it to the next level for us. And this is going to give us so much to work on and to realize and to advance the work to the next step. So please have the peace of knowing that all your efforts are going to propel our community into the next layer. And I am so grateful that you opted for this as a project, and so grateful that Jack's leaned in and that everybody supported you to do it. It's phenomenal. And I can't, I will certainly keep you, connected to what the next steps are. But thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just so filled with gratitude at this moment for all this amazing work.
Thank you for your kind words, Chris. And thank you, Jax.
It's been my absolute pleasure working with you. So we will reconvene for our next meeting in summer on June 9th. We have a QR code on the screen where we would really love your feedback about today and what you want to learn about in these meetings. They happen every quarter, the second Monday of the month from noon to 1:30. We extended today because this was the time that it worked for Karina before she graduates. So thank you all for staying for this extra time. Thank you, Karina, for presenting. Thank you, LaRhonda, for presenting. Thank you to our first three presenters, Nadia, Stephanie, and Kelli. And this was really incredible. I really encourage all of you, if you have questions that didn't get answered today or things that you are noodling on and you want to come back, please reach out to any of our presenters. We are all in spirit together doing this work, trying to do better, trying to protect our children and our parents. Thank you for joining us today.